I'm Charlotte Alter, and this is Person of the Week, a new show from Time about the people who shape our world and the forces that shape them. As a senior correspondent for Time, I've talked to thousands of people, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that to understand our world, you need to understand the people who influence it. So this summer, I'll be having more conversations with the humans behind the headlines, and I'm bringing them to you firsthand. Are you ready to meet Time's Person of the Week? Subscribe now wherever you get your podcasts.
From Sugar 23, I'm Angela Ledgerwood, and this is Lit Up. Hi everyone, it's Angie here. I am taking a break this week, but I wanted to share a podcast from my great friend and the producer of Lit Up, Liam Billingham. It's called Die Hard on a Blank, and it explores the influence of the film Die Hard on action movies, one action movie at a time. Now, I wouldn't usually share a podcast like this about action movies. However, this episode, they are doing a deep dive into Cliffhanger, one of the movies that shaped my 90s childhood. I think I saw it way too young in the theater, and I can still see that opening scene where the glove slips. So this episode is awesome. It's with Jamelle Bouie, the New York Times opinion writer, who also has, a very clear and present connection to Cliffhanger. Do you like what I just did then? Thank you. So everyone enjoy. I'm so proud of my colleague who's my rock at work. So enjoy.
Welcome to Die Hard on a Blank, the podcast where we explore the influence of Die Hard on action cinema, one action movie at a time. I'm Philip Gawthorne, and with me, as always, is Liam Billingham. Today's film is Cliffhanger.
It's Die Hard on a Mountain. Phil, are you a climber? Are you a climbing type? Do you like to go out on the mountain?
No.
With your girlfriend, who clearly is an inexperienced
climber? No, you know me.
climber?
I prefer to be in the helicopter rather than like.
Yeah, you are the helicopter guy. I should have remembered.
In that scenario, I'd rather be in the Huey.
In the Huey. Well, we have a special guest in the Huey this week, and we're really, really excited to have him here. We have Jamelle Bouie. Hi, Jamelle.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing all right. Have not seen this movie in a long time, and I like it.
Yeah, the reviz was very, very exciting, and I can't wait to get into it. So, briefly, Jamelle Bouie is an opinion writer at the New York Times, but also hosts one of my favorite podcasts. I'm a loyal patron. I just say patron. What am I doing here? Of the show Unclear and Present Danger, which, Jamelle, am I getting it right? It's sort of about the politics of the 90s action movie and thriller.
Yeah, it's like the politics of the 90s through the action movies and thrillers and political thrillers of the 90s, sort of. And now we just because you're always starved for content, and it makes the show a bit interesting. We've expanded a bit beyond simply political and military thrillers. We've done some science fiction movies, some other stuff, but the basic idea is that like we're trying to historicize the 1990s as a very specific era in American history through the movies of the period and through movies that aren't really made anymore. This is part of why we chose this particular genre. Like these kinds of movies don't really exist anymore. And their high point was very much the 90s. And so kind of it's trying to take that apart a bit.
Yeah, and when we decided to launch this pod, I sort of discovered your pod, and I was like, oh, I feel like we have sibling pods here doing slightly different things. But like, one of the things that we love is every time we watch one of these movies, and I feel like a very old man saying this, but I'm like, they just don't make them like this anymore. Like, especially at the end of Cliffhanger, which is the film we're talking about today. Yeah, I just as a quick plug, I spent a big chunk of my recent paternity leave just catching up on your Patreon and that Third Man episode, which Third Man is one of my favorite movies. And outside the sort of 90s action movie template, of course, but that was a really great episode. So if you haven't...
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, that movie is unbelievable. And I'm very excited. We don't have to get into the whole feed right now, but I'm very excited about the Costa Gavras series that you're doing. I think that's really exciting. Do you have a favorite action movie of all time?
A favorite action movie of all time? That's a really good question. I'm looking over at my movie shelf right now just to see if there's something that immediately jumps out. Because I like the genre a lot. There's stuff I watch again and again, but it's hard to say what constitutes a favorite. Maybe if I had to say like a single favorite, it might be Escape from New York.
Oh, wow. Love that.
It might be Heat, which I think of as an action movie.
Phil is quiet clapping, by the way, that you just said.
Choices of impeccable taste.
There's a lot of stuff. And then like these are just American films. Like obviously I love Police Story. I love Hard Boiled, like so.
We covered that, and I think we recorded for 4.5 hours.
I kind of lost my mind.
Yeah,
during
Phil
that
went
episode
crazy. Like I was watching it, the night before, and I was like, I can't believe this movie exists, and everyone involved with it isn't dead in the shooting of this film. It's unbelievable. Do you have a copy of Die Hard on that shelf?
I do. I have a 4K Blu-ray of Die Hard, and then I have from years ago, there was a box set of all the Die Hards up to, Live Free and Die Hard, and those are all Blu-rays. And so I keep that around because they haven't released 4Ks of really Die Hard with a Vengeance is the one I want in a restoration. The others I can, do without, but.
Makes total sense. What made you pick, and then we'll jump into the movie we're talking about today, what made you pick Cliffhanger? I sent you sure, it was a short list, but you were like, I'd watch Cliffhanger again. Was it that you hadn't seen it in a while?
I hadn't seen it in a while, first of all. And second of all, I just have a very fond memory of the first time first time I saw it. And there's a scene towards the end where Stallone picks up a guy and impales him on a stalagmite or something. And I was like, that's pretty cool.
That's badass.
That's pretty cool. I like that. So I'll watch that again.
I really appreciate that choice. Phil, you're a Stallone head? I think my voice just cracked. Let me say that again. You're a Stallone head, I would say.
Yeah, this
right?
is our first Stallone, so it's kind of an exciting moment. We're what is this, our 14th episode? We haven't done a Stallone yet. I love the guy. Kind of in a weird way, I love his missteps more than his home runs in an odd way. I'm weirdly obsessed with Cobra. I slap Cobra on a Friday night in the background to get me pumped, for it's utterly bizarre, completely egomania, run amok, but it's kind of awesome. It's kind of amazingly shot. And, Stallone, I really do really love Stallone. Going back obviously to the original Rocky, particularly probably my favorite Stallone movie is First Blood, which is very important to this show because it's sort of there would be no Die Hard without First Blood. This show is looking at Die Hard's influence across action cinema, but Die Hard was of course influenced by First Blood and was described as Rambo in a building. So I think he is kind of one of our last great movie stars, and also kind of misunderstood guy as actually. It's interesting how there's a disparity sometimes between the way that actors read on film and how they are in real life. And I think the misconception about Stallone is that he's, a sort of a bit of a musclehead and not necessarily, an intellectual, but actually nothing could be further from the truth. And he's, lest we forget that he of course wrote Rocky, is a self-made guy, is a director, is a very, very thoughtful, intellectual, well-read, erudite, witty guy. But yet on film, he also is smart enough to know this is my brand. This is what my audience like. And I think as the years have gone by and he's experimented with these other things, and this film's interesting because it was actually no pun intended, given his job in this, it was kind of him rescuing himself, rescuing his brand after 3 turkeys in a row, which were Rocky V, Oscar,
Rocky V.
and
I like Rocky.
Stop
Sorry,
or My
I like
Mom Will
Rocky V.
Shoot.
Oh, I like Stop or My Mom Will Shoot too.
Stop or My Mom Will Shoot is very bad. I'm sorry.
It is bad. It is. Of course, it's bad. But there's something still really enjoyable and stupid about it, right?
Where are you guys on Stallone?
Okay. So I don't disagree with you that Stallone is a much more interesting guy than I think he gets credit for. I do think that his instincts as like an actor aren't always great. And I do think his politics are very bad. But that doesn't always sort of find its way into his films necessarily. I like him when he's working much more in a mode of like trying to be a serious actor and not so much like Stallone, the action star. So there's a movie from like 80, 81. It's called like Nighthawks or something. Mm-hmm. Yeah, which I like quite a bit. I think it's a very good movie, and I think Stallone gives a great performance. I think Stallone is great, sort of, in the 90s in Copland, which I think is one of his
great movie.
His best
singular
ever
best
performance in my
performances.
view. Yeah.
And I kind of wish Stallone had done more of that throughout his career. This is why I like his performance in Creed so much, because it was just like a much more serious, like subtle performance. It was a performance. It wasn't just this cartoon character that I think unfortunately defines much of his legacy as an actor.
I just want to pick up on one of the points that you made there, which about his politics, because I was just reading a lot about how aligned he was with the Reagan era politics and how that was Rambo was embraced by Reagan personally, and it kind of caught the national psyche in that time. And but yet with this film, one of the reasons why I was so interested as to why you picked it and why you wanted to talk about it was that, unlike so many of the films that you so expertly unpack on Clear and Present Danger, in terms of your extrapolating what they're saying about the politics of the time, this film, to me, is, unless I'm missing something, is utterly apolitical. And one of the few films that we've done on the show that there's no theme, it has nothing to say. There's really no political context for it whatsoever, except maybe Eric Quaylen's backstory, which is sketched over, So I was really interested, given that you're so interested in that political analysis, why this movie?
I mean, although I am very much interested in political analysis, sometimes I just enjoy a dumb movie.
It's a great answer.
And so this was in a funny way, precisely because this is not my podcast at all. I thought it'd be fun just to sort of tackle something that isn't so explicitly political. Although on Unclear and Present Danger, we do sometimes watch films that aren't especially political, but you can always glean some political content or context from the film. Cliffhanger is a little difficult in that regard, because it very much is a kind of a straightforward, I guess you'd call like environmental thriller.
Oh yeah, it is kind of an environmental thriller. Yeah, I that actually was sort of the answer that I was hoping you would give, Jamel. Where you're like, sometimes I just want to watch a dumb movie, guys. Like, this rules. And by the way, I think this movie rules. And in the rewatch, I think it's crazily influential on action movies that are going to come after it, especially in some of its set pieces. But before we jump into that, Phil, do you want to give us our top line facts about Cliffhanger, including some stuff that I was very, very surprised by?
Sure. So Cliffhanger just celebrated its 30th anniversary.
Yeah, let me show you something that I have here.
Oh.
Let me see my camera.
Ooh.
Yeah, the 4K Steelbook that just came out that I bought. I bought specifically to watch for this.
Oh
for
my
this
goodness! You
podcast.
get the gold star. I just watched it on Netflix. You get the gold star for that. I watched it on pay-per-view in the 90s when it came out. That was I think we spent $20 to watch the pay-per-view on American television. It was a big deal.
Yeah, we should say for our listeners, as long as they don't pull it by the time the episode comes out, it is currently streaming on Netflix. Or you could buy that a very fancy steelbook.
Phil's pre-ordering it or ordering it right now while we're recording.
This movie's really in the zeitgeist. I mean, it just had like a commercial. There was a sequel that's been announced. There was a big commercial around the Super Bowl that was riffing on the cliffhanger with Stallone appearing in it. So it premiered at the 93 Cannes Film Festival. I don't know how long its standing ovation was.
What? That is the thing that surprised me. They premiered it at the Cannes Film Festival. Don't get me wrong, that's cool, but also very, very surprising to me that this
didn't
film
win the
premiered at
Palme
Cannes.
d'Or. Bizarre.
That's bullshit. What?
Those idiots. They don't recognize great movie making. It received its US release a week later on May 28th, 1993, distributed by TriStar. This was approximately 6 months after our last film, Passenger 57, which was released on November 6, 1992. And we're now 5 years after the release of Die Hard, which was, of course, in the summer of 1988. It was directed by Renny Harlin, who also produced, along with Mario Kassar and Alan Marshall. It stars Sylvester Stallone, John Lithgow, Michael Rooker, and Janine Turner. The screenplay was written by Michael France and Stallone himself, from a story by France and a premise by American rock climber John Long. Quite an unusually diffuse. There's reasons for that. But on an estimated budget of $70 million, it grossed $255 million. It was a really big hit, and it was a hit that Stallone desperately needed at that point in his career. It was really kind of a course correct for him after this somewhat ill-advised foray into broad comedy with Oscar and Stop or My Mom Will Shoot.
Can I say real quickly? I love reading the box office totals for movies in this period. Because I mean, these days to get those kind of numbers, you kind of have to have like a IP, like superhero IP property, and that's going to get you, unless you have some unusually big hit, like I don't know, like some kids thing that like kids are obsessed with or whatever. It's going to be an IP. Here we have a movie called Cliffhanger that is kind of like, what if a guy was on a cliff? Like, that's the movie.
What if Die Hard? But
that's how it was pitched.
What if a guy was on it? What if Sly Stallone were on a cliff? Then what? And people lost their minds. I got to see this. Got to opening night. Got to go check this out. And I love that the box office totals for the hits of this period tell a story of how you could kind of have a hit without anything behind the film other than you have a star and like a somewhat novel premise. And that's it. That's all you need.
And even then, as you say, it's not particularly high concept, right? It's just, hey, Stallone's back doing action. It's on a cliff.
It's like almost,
70 million.
It's almost like you can picture the junior executive at TriStar. They're like, so we just paid you $1 million. Like, what do you have? And he like looks around the room and he sees a picture of Sylvester Stallone, and then he looks somewhere else and sees a mountain, and he goes, Sylvester Stallone on a mountain, and they're like, sold. Here's $55 million. Get Renny Harlin. Like that.
Well, it's interesting because it was actually kind of we won't get too bogged down in production history, but Renny Harlin and Stallone were supposed to do this other film called Gale Force that was like Die Hard in a Hurricane, which later sort of became in a weird way like Hurricane Heist.
Oh, okay, right.
I would suggest.
I have never heard of Hurricane Heist.
Sorry, say again.
I said I've never heard of Hurricane Heist.
Oh, it's actually, I kind of like it.
He's looking it up, guys. He's ordering the Steelbook right now.
I like it. We'll get to it.
I mean, the title alone has me sold.
Yeah. Is that on the pod, Phil? Are we covering that one?
I do have it on the list. It's very much a Die Hard scenario.
Oh my god!
But basically, that film collapsed, and Renny Harlin had already been paid, I think like $3 million from the production company, and it was one of those things where it's like, we need a project now. And so it almost happened out of the ashes of a project that collapsed. So yeah, interesting background, but yeah, it isn't particularly high concept. It is kind of like Stallone on a cliff. Let's go. And it is
a great example of the Die Hard on a blank premise. Which, Phil, for those who are listening, maybe they've joined because they're Jamel fans. Can you explain what Die Hard on a blank means for those uninitiated?
Of course,
in our obsessive podcast.
Of course. So, Die Hard on a blank is cultural or industry shorthand for any movie that utilizes this particular storytelling paradigm, which is broadly bad guys take over a blank, plane, bus, hot air balloon, whatever it might be, and it's up to usually one guy or group of folks to fight back. In this instance, it's essentially Die Hard on a Mountain. But it also, if we move on to our section called Die Hard DNA,
Excuse me, hang on.
get a little more specific.
Die Hard DNA. I have to do the Jurassic Park reference. It feels important to do that on the show. So tell us about how does this movie, what Die Hard DNA does it contain?
Well, obviously, the overall concept isn't so much, with a lot of these films we've talked about, like Under Siege or Passenger 57, or Toy Soldiers, it's terrorists taking over a contained physical space. This one's slightly different, being that it's in the wilderness, but it's still nonetheless a sort of prison of sorts. It's almost more like the agoraphobic scenario rather than the claustrophobic scenario we've had in other situations. More specifically, the correlation with Die Hard is the heist, right? This is a group of ruthless bad guys pull off this audacious heist. Innocent people are caught in the middle of it, and it's up to one guy to save the day, which in this instance is Sylvester Stallone. In terms of like personnel, we have Renny Harlin helming, who of course was the director of Die Hard 2. Production designer John Vallone was also the production designer of Die Hard 2. Numerous other Joel Silver pictures, including Predator and Commando. Same editor as Die Hard, Frank J. Urosti. Producer Mario Kassar produced the Rambo movies. We mentioned why that's relevant earlier. The original First Blood, of course, inspired Die Hard to an extent. And the cinematographer, Alex Thompson, would go on to shoot Executive Decision, which features some very similar aerial sequences, including a mid-air transfer. So definitely plenty of this film is chock full of Die Hard DNA.
Die Hard DNA. Oh my God. That's a ridiculous joke. Executive Decision is great. I can't wait till we cover that one on the show.
I feel like it comes up every episode.
It does.
That's a fun movie. A fun movie also because, who is it? Seagal gets knocked off the board very early.
Absolutely.
Have you done that one yet, Jamel?
No, we're moving. We haven't yet. We're moving in chronological order, and so we're currently in 1995. I don't think Executive Decision comes out till 97.
I think it's 97. Yeah, I think that's true. That's a pretty regular rewatch for me, and I also am excited, completely as a tangent, for you guys to get to The Peacemaker, which is also a 97 movie that I also love, like really unabashedly love The Peacemaker.
97 is a good year for this movie because I think this kind of movie, because I think also The Siege comes out in 97, maybe that's 98. Enemy of the State is around this time. All the ones that people really think of are like hitting about now. Well,
and to your point earlier about how like there was a time when you could make what if Die Hard but on a mountain. There was also a period of time like in the late 90s when on one Friday night you could go see Enemy of the State, and the following Friday you could go see The Executive Decision. It was like we didn't know how good we had it in that period of time.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's amazing how many people involved with the previous Die Hard movies or Die Hard 2 came back for this, and you could just feel that like one thing that I think we've entered with this period, especially having covered Passenger 57 last week, is we're getting to the point when like these movies are coming at a clip, like a very, very regular clip. And it's a little bit of like a golden age I know it's felt that way but it's like the fact that we had Passenger 57, then we're going to move on to this. Then we have Last Action Hero. The fact that these movies were all coming at this crazy clip, like we're entering this great moment in terms of these kinds of movies, these kinds of action movies. Speaking of which, Phil, can we talk about the anatomy of an action movie? The 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, sometimes 7 tenets. We live in a Twilight world.
And there are no friends at dusk.
Tenets of the action movie that we like to cover on the show. And they are the premise, the ticking clock, the hero, the villain, the action, the humor, and the lady.
Yeah. So we'll start with let's start with the premise. We touched on it before. Unusually, this film actually has a credit exclusively for the premise from the American rock climber and author John Long. This film, it just had one of those tortured story and script, multiple revisions, multiple writers, ended up being a kind of negotiation, and there was like a lawsuit, and he ended up getting this credit. But I think it's a great premise, which is thus. After an attempted mid-air heist of a treasury plane results in a violent plane crash, experienced mountain climbers Walker and Tucker are taken hostage by the ruthless thieves who coerce them into helping them find the missing cases of money. But this also connects to the ticking clock and the kind of paradox, which I think is kind of genius, which is as soon as they find that money, they know they will be killed, as they will have served their purpose. So that is such an interesting wrinkle, right? That, do you know what I mean? Like that essentially means that our two heroes have to work together to run interference, and disrupt the plan whilst still being coerced into finding this money, but they can't actually achieve that goal because that will result in their death. Quite interesting.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. It made me think a little bit about some of the, this is a beautiful movie to look at when it's not, clearly a set. No offense to the movie. And sometimes when there's a shot of Janine Turner towards the end of this movie that she stands up and looks around. You're like, woof, early green screen. Hello, nice to see you. But there's something almost like a Western in the scope of this movie where it's it's existentially if these guys do it, they're going to die. When they do it, they're going to die. And I appreciate that it sort of has this kind of this is a brutal movie. This is kind of a brutal, it's silly, but it's also relentless.
Yeah, where would you rank this amongst other Die Hard on a Blank kind of movies, Juma, in terms of its premise and conceit?
In terms of its premise and conceit, I'd say it's one of the more interesting ones, precisely because it is the confined area is still sort of like an open space, right? Sort of it being the wilderness, even though they are climbing mountains in quite an isolated place, the expansiveness of it just makes it a little more visually interesting. Kind of like you can tell the writers, filmmakers have to think a little more creatively about how are you going to create obstacles for the characters, because you can't rely on a small enclosure to do that work for you. One of my favorite Die Hard on a Blank movies is Under Siege. And I like Under Siege despite the fact that it is in a lot of ways a straightforward rehash of Die Hard. And it's more or less rehashed because it takes place in this very confined space. And so you're kind of doing a lot of the same stuff you did in that original film and in its sequel. It's not for nothing, right, that the third Die Hard movie opens up in an attempt to kind of make things a little more interesting, to kind of add a different dimension, to add a dimension of time to all of this, not just am I going to get caught in this confined space, but what there is a clock I have to beat, and I think that's a natural expansion of the concept a bit, and I think it really works here a lot.
It's true, because this is one of we talked about how, we often talk about these things where we assess the premise, how does this function as an arena for mayhem? What are the stakes? What are the threats? How in Nakatomi Plaza, that you could fall off the building. There's elevator shafts that you could fall down. It's somewhat claustrophobic. There's a terrorist that could come out from any corridor at any moment. In this instance, it's the elements itself. This is what's cool about it is it's so beautiful, and as you said, it's so cinematic and expansive and gorgeous to look at the same time, absolutely terrifying place. You could freeze to death, you could fall off the mountain, you could cut yourself on these jagged rocks. It's a very, very frightening and yet beautiful place, which is one of the reasons why this is just it's almost why did no one do this? As with so many great ideas, why did nobody do this before? Because, the opening shots really are magnificent. I would have loved to have, I didn't see this at the cinema. I didn't see it on the big screen, unfortunately, when it came out, but it must have been pretty sensational. Those vistas are spectacular.
It kind of blows my mind also that unlike this film has an opening scene that is so different from every other movie of this genre. I wrote in my notes, my ridiculous notes that I take when I watch the movie. About a year ago, I put this movie on. I think it was on Netflix or maybe it was Hulu. I don't know. And I almost skipped the first scene because the first scene is so brutal and I think kind of brilliantly executed that. and so extreme that were it not for the violence that comes up later in the movie, you're like, why is this in like a summer thriller that came out, as you said, in May of 1992? And I think what's really impressive about the setting and all these elements is that like you could just fall and die here. Like it really takes advantage of that. There's the great moment towards the end when Janine Turner, this is when she walks in front of green screen, by the way. Janine Turner hears the helicopter, and Lithgow kind of comes up he comes up in the helicopter, and she assumes it's Frank, and then he pulls out that gun, and it's like, well, where are you going to go? Like, I had a moment of like, she could just, turn and run the other way, but I'm like, oh no, she's on a cliff. The movie is called Cliffhanger. Like, there's no escaping the reality of it, and it does it kind of as well as any of these does. It's almost like taking the broken glass in Die Hard and putting it everywhere that this movie takes place, right? Because it's such a crazily forbidding terrain to think about in terms of how the characters have to interact with their environment.
It's a great point. While you talk about that opening scene, which takes us in nicely into our hero section because it sort of defines our hero's flaw. But could you just very briefly describe for anyone that hasn't seen the movie just what exactly happens in that opening scene?
Yeah, I mean, so in the opening scene, we get the beautiful vistas of... did they shoot this in Colorado? Do you guys know?
Italy, but it's subbing.
Oh, Italy.
Yeah, they shot
it
in
in Italy?
Yeah, the exteriors.
Ugh. Hey, what if that studio exec was like, also, we have to shoot it in Italy? And they were like, you're right. So... yeah, in the opening scene, we're treated to a helicopter taking off. We don't even see it take off, but it's flying through the mountains, and we come to learn that it's there to rescue, I don't know his first name, but Tucker, played by Michael Rooker, who has climbed the mountain with his very inexperienced girlfriend, and they're on a peak, and he has injured himself. And Stallone as Gabe Walker is simultaneously climbing the mountain to save them. The helicopter lands on another peak, and they throw a line across and they hook it up to the mountain, and Tucker, played by Michael Rooker, goes across, and then Stallone sends Sarah, Michael Rooker's girlfriend, across, and I think the most harrowing shot in the movie, we see the plastic on her carabiner or the clip break, and after Sylvester Stallone tries to save her unsuccessfully, she falls to her death, thus solidifying the probably the most sort of interesting antagonism in the movie, in my opinion, which is between Sylvester Stallone as Gabe Walker and Michael Rooker as Tucker. And it's very unfortunate that their last names are Walker and Tucker, because they're so close together that I have spent this whole spiel being like, which one am I talking about right now? But it's really harrowing, and it's like a haunted hero character, like in our previous film, Wesley Snipes in Passenger 57. Do you guys feel like it's just a little too much, or do you think it works really well?
I think it works great. I think it works really well because the sequence isn't particularly long, and it does a very good job of just like giving you the emotional stakes of this relationship. Like, and also critically telling you the kinds of thrills you should anticipate in this film, right? Like, you're gonna watch this, we're gonna be on mountains, there's gonna be all of that, it's gonna be very tense. So you get a preview, a nice little amuse-bouche of the rest of the film, but then also establishing emotional stakes for our two characters. And I think it actually works quite well in that regard.
And there's a point I wanted to make about that too, which is, and that, just piggybacking on the point you just made, which is I think it serves a similar function as the plane crash in Die Hard 2, in the sense that it's Rennie Harlin doubling down on like, hey, no one's safe here, right? Like,
right.
You don't know what's going to happen. This place is terrifying. These are the stakes. And he I'm not even in like Die Hard 2. It's like, it's halfway through the movie. He's like, guess what, motherfuckers? It's the opening scene. I'm doing this. And it's like,
right.
It really is setting
like
a tone of, like anything can happen. But and I did want to just, before we get into our more analysis on the hero, I think Rennie Harlin is kind of a bit of a cinematic sociopath, right? Like, he started in horror. He started with Nightmare on Elm Street 4, and he seems to take a weird glee, and this film's full of it, in like kind of sadistic moments, like the sports guys getting shot in the back, and so the moment with the rabbit, which was actually there's a sequence where the rabbit's running around and he actually had it shot, and they had to Stallone had to pay $100,000 of his own money to reshoot that bit because test audiences
killed the bunny?
rebelled. So basically, Rennie Harlin, Meanie Bobini.
Yeah.
I think he might. He's kind of got a real cruel streak.
Rennie, you okay? You okay, Rennie? Yeah, I mean, I think for me, something that felt true in watching this and more in the conversation, and it could be once again the appearance of John Lithgow as the villain, but there's a little bit of what we talked about with Ricochet, the vulgar auteurist quality to Rennie Harlin, where he kind of wants to put your face in the mud and like keep it there, and like to talk about our heroes, I feel like the movie kind of has two heroes. One is Sylvester Stallone as Gabe Walker, and the other is Rooker as Tucker, and like their relationship. This trauma that opens the movie that pushes them apart as best friends, I would say, and also ruins his relationship with Janine Turner. They're both kind of like, from my point of view, equally important. Like he loves his bro as much as he loves his girlfriend in the movie, but I feel like it's very clear at the end of the movie that Sylvester Stallone and Janine Turner have kind of worked out their differences. But I'm not sure that Michael Rooker and Sylvester Stallone are going to be best friends. Like, it's funny how quickly she falls and how quickly it cuts to him looking at him like, you son of a bitch, you dropped my girlfriend. It's like, it's not his fault. She's on the mountain, my dude. Like, you brought her up here. So I feel like, yeah, he's a really, really dark and sadistic filmmaker, but he's aided by the fact that I think both of these guys are pretty good in this movie. Rooker in particular is just like batting, like he's 150%. Every word he says is like, and this is that Rooker phase with like JFK and all these other movies where he's just like he comes out the gate, and Henry, the Portrait of a Serial Killer, where you're just like, there's no actor like this guy.
Like, yeah, he was having
I'm looking
moment.
real quick to see what. So yeah, 90 Days of Thunder, JFK, 91, Cliffhanger, Tombstone, also 93.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I love Michael Rooker. I think it's unfortunate, and this is why I think he does quite well cast in a film like JFK, or he's in Mississippi Burning.
Mm-hmm.
It's unfortunate that Michael Rooker looks and sounds like a Klansman.
Woof. Yeah, he's.
I mean, he's
hard.
I know he does not hold those views whatsoever. It's just sort of like if you had to like draw a picture, like what does a guy like an old Southern racist look like? And you might draw a picture that look like Michael Rooker.
Well, and he has that sort of way that, his face is hardened and like his jaw sticks out a little bit. And like he can just slip into that. I mean, quite frankly, slips into that role quite naturally in those movies. Like in my head, I'm like, is he in A Time to Kill? Like
I literally just thought the same thing. Like I was like, he must have been in A Time to Kill, like burning those crosses, right? No, not at all.
It's sort of like, or Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, these sort of sweaty Southern films that deal with race or whatever the case might be.
I think it's the reason he never sort of became a leading man, but he stayed around.
I think that's exactly
for
right.
35 years because he just has the look and cadence of a supporting actor, a great supporting actor. And he's worked consistently now. He's like in the Marvelverse, and he's kind of had this even extra, like not even a second act, but just a turbocharge at the end of.
He's a character actor.
But he's like a top
this career
character actor.
Yeah.
But how do you guys feel about like this part, Gabe Walker, in the pantheon of Stallone's other roles?
It's a good question.
This is my favorite I grew up watching the Rambo movies. I didn't grow up as much with the Rocky movies, though I like them. And in some ways, this is my favorite Sylvester Stallone movie, just because it was the one that was on in my house all the time. We taped it off pay-per-view. Like, I watched it all the time. God, it feels like we taped it off pay-per-view. I'm a million. But, like, it just feels really... I like rewatching it. And actually, I'm a fan of... I've heard people poke fun at it, but I think he's pretty good in that scene with Janine Turner where he shows up after 9 months and he's like... talks about how things fell apart on the ledge. Like, the writing is a little, like... But they both pull it off pretty well, I think. And I think it's an illustration that, like, when Stallone goes subtle, sort of to your point, Jamal, about Copland and some of these other things, he's a pretty good actor as long as he's not kind of doing the like thing that he does in some of the later Rocky movies.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think this is for being an action thriller, this is a fairly subtle performance, and it stands out. I just watched him in Demolition Man and Judge Dredd. So those are the two most recent Sly Stallone performances I have in my head.
What a
double
header.
Yeah. One of those movies is pretty decent.
Judge Dredd, right? No, I know.
Yeah, Judge Dredd. That's the classic. But having those two performances in my head, in comparison, this is like quite subtle and quite like emotionally interesting. Like precisely because of this relationship between him and Rooker's character and their anger towards each other, but then also the necessity of them working together, and also, as we've discussed, this knowledge that sort of like these guys are going to kill them once they've accomplished what they have to accomplish. And so all of that, I think Stallone plays all of that pretty well, while also doing the physical stuff pretty well. So, yeah.
I think it's a good character too. And I think Stallone now, after these missteps, kind of realizes I think Stallone, like a lot of movie stars, when they try something different and it doesn't work, they kind of go back to the well of what has worked. And this character, I think Stallone excels playing these sort of wounded, kind of down on their luck, quite introverted and almost shy characters. Really, really well. That's what Rocky is. That's what Rambo, at least at the beginning, was. Where his acting is more front and center, especially in the early scenes in First Blood. First Blood, he's incredible.
He's so good in First Blood.
That's a real
really
actor doing real work.
Everyone in that movie is exceptional.
It's a stunning movie.
I think that's a really strong movie.
Not to do like a whole digression on First Blood, but it's wild how that movie is just so unlike its sequels in every possible way. Like First Blood is a fairly sedate Vietnam War kind of psychological piece. And yeah, Stallone's great in it, but it's just like, it's so striking to me how even the immediate sequel is just like a complete tonal 180 from the first film.
Yeah, it's almost, and politically, it's gone, whereas it feels like First Blood was a sensitive critique. By the time, it was Rambo First Blood Part 2, it was like, nah, fuck all that.
There's this really interesting strain in action movies of so many of the leads openly referencing and talking about their time in Vietnam, right? Like my favorite action movie is still Lethal Weapon. And like that first Lethal Weapon movie is kind of about these guys. I mean, it's about these guys who the villains met in Vietnam and are now smuggling drugs, right? So it's like, I appreciate that some of these movies had like a resonance with real world events, and Lethal Weapon kept that trend going, whereas Rocky sort of did, Rambo sort of did, but like from a very, very strange sort of decisions are made in these movies to use real world events, like the third one in particular with the stuff in Afghanistan. Like it's kind of wild how it abandoned what felt sort of thoughtful and in a sense progressive with that first Rambo movie. It's kind of nuts. Can I tell you, not to digress also, but can I tell you guys a very, very quick Demolition Man story? I think you'll like this. I think you'll appreciate this. Of course. So my father and I went to see The Fugitive. We were on vacation. I think we were in Cape Cod, and it was like a Thursday morning screening, or Friday morning, maybe the day of it. It was quite packed. It was quite a packed movie. And we're sitting in the movie theater, and the trailer for Demolition Man comes on, and like, in 95, is that when that 94, 95, when that movie came on? I don't think anyone had quite seen it. And the trailer is just preposterous. Wesley Snipes and the blonde hair and like all this crazy stuff. And like, it's like this insane trailer. And it ends and it goes black and the movie theater is silent. No one reacts. And my dad very loudly goes, "That looks like a good movie." And the entire movie theater just like lost their minds because no one knew what to do with that movie. And when it came out, no one knew what to do with it. And now it's kind of like, Jamel, to your point, kind of a little bit of a bizarre satirical classic.
Yeah, I mean, I think that has everything to do with Wesley Snipes' performance, which is just completely unhinged in the best way. Takes a character that could actually be very offensive and just completely makes the character his own, but then also gives this like huge and super compelling performance. I think it's Stallone's fine in it, and like the movie actually kind of drags a bit in the middle, but Wesley Snipes is truly excellent. Like it's truly a great Snipes performance.
How do we think it stacks up against John Lithgow as the villain Eric Quaylen in this film?
I love Lithgow so much.
He's so good, man.
I love Lithgow.
Walker! Like, just the extent to which this guy is chewing it. Rooker and Lithgow are just gnawing on everything conceivable. Every piece of mountain is in their mouth in this movie. Phil, you said it's Gruber-esque. Do you want to talk a little more about that?
You know, we know very little about him, but I wrote down the one sort of bit of backstory that we had, which is when the like FBI guys are bringing the Treasury agents up to speed, and they're like, "Oh, this is the guy we think might be pulling this off," and he's described as, quote, "a former member of military intelligence who found out it's more profitable going to the other side. Industrial espionage, hijacking diamonds from South Africa, theft and disposal of millions in negotiable bearer bonds."
Bearer bonds.
They're back.
They're always there. Bearer bonds.
Oh
my goodness.
Yeah. So and clearly, and I have another quote which we'll talk about later about how directly I think he was going for the Rickman vibe. But I do have my lukewarm take is Lithgow actually
Lukewarm.
bad in this? Because that accent is not an English accent. I have to...
This is a personal
Yes, it
cultural
is.
critique.
It
yeah,
is.
Like, are you offended that it's like, why do all the bad guys have to be vaguely blandly
Yes, I am.
British in
I'm
Passenger
deeply
57
offended.
and in this movie?
No, look, it's not a good
fair.
English accent, but he's such a great actor that you can quickly get past it, right? It kind of does it. You're like, oh, he's trying an English accent, and I stress the word trying. But he's so entertaining, and like he's just such a great actor that it doesn't even matter that his accent is fucked in this movie.
Can I say something that might anger you? And I'm curious, Jamel, if you had the same experience as a younger person watching this movie, but I was pretty sure John Lithgow was English when I was 11 years old. Like, to be totally honest, I was like, that's an
You
English
hadn't met
person.
any English
Like,
people, presumably.
maybe, well, I don't know. It's hard to say. But I don't know. Is he bad? I think he's appropriately ridiculous in this movie. And most of the villains in this movie are ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Just because when Lithgow is in this mode, I'm not really going for him for like fidelity, you know? It's just his insane energy is what I want to see, and I think he brought that here.
He is absolutely incredible in the final sequence when he's on the helicopter and just like throwing one-liners like, "We used to have the money, now we have each other," and you're like, yeah.
Also, it's like
exactly
it's now constitutional law that every action film has to end with one of the characters going, "It's just you and me now. It's just you and me now,
Yeah.
Jack." That has to happen, like, and it happens, and we're like, yes, ticked it off the list.
What are your guys' general... I know we have our award we give, or we have our category that we talk about, and I feel like bringing it up right now. Phil, do you want to cue us off with our favorite question about the villains in this movie?
Who's your favorite terrorist?
Who's your favorite
The thing
terrorist?
was, I didn't lean on it too heavily today, but if you have thoughts, because it trod a little on some of our categories later, but if you have a favorite terrorist, throw him in the mix.
I find... Go ahead, please.
No, you go ahead.
I find every villain in this movie so goddamn obnoxious, with the exception that of Lithgow, that I'm like, I don't like any of these people. I sort of like Travers because I think that guy is a good but like, why are you shouting every line, my dude? You can just say things sometimes. And also, we talked about this with Toy Soldiers. I hate when like the terrorist has a machine gun and like their hostages are moving forward and they're like, "Move faster," and they hit them. It's like, what are we doing here? It's a mountain. We're walking as fast as we can. So I'm pretty like turned off by most of the terrorists, though I will note this, along with Passenger 57 and the future and I think recently covered on Clear and Present Danger, Die Hard with a Vengeance, another movie where the villain has like a lady sidekick who he may or may not be romantically involved with.
Yeah.
Like at one point when he kills her, that's a great moment, but like they're kind of maybe together. I sort of appreciate that, like that is part of this movie and a trend that we're seeing. Jamel, what are your thoughts? Do you have a favorite terrorist or thoughts on these terrorists?
Yeah, I like Rex Lynn as Travers. I like Rex Lynn whenever he shows up. In part just because he's like a huge dude. It's always fun to be like, that guy is giant.
What else is Rex Lynn in?
So he's in many things. He's in Sniper, which came out also this year. He is in Wyatt Earp, Clear and Present Danger, The Long Kiss Goodnight,
I
The
love that
Postman,
movie.
Rush Hour, Ghost of Mars.
Who
which
is he in Clear and Present Danger? I'm trying to remember.
He's just a detective.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's right. I love that movie. Just as a side note, I think that movie's great.
I also love
There's a
that
little
movie.
shout I want to do
I know
about
you do.
Rex Lynn, which because usually he's like he's almost so ubiquitous that you almost think he actually is a cop in real life because he just reads that way. But he did this really interesting and weird movie that I think is on one of the streamers right now. I forget which one, called Night Game, where he plays a serial killer with a hook for a hand, whose gimmick is that he was a failed baseball pitcher. And so he times his murders to pitching for the Houston Astros. And Roy Scheider is the detective on the case. And it's basically a very un-Rex Lynn kind of performance where he gets a little bit more to do something a bit different. And I'm glad you guys are giving him some love because I think he's fucking terrific in this movie. He's so good in it,
He's a
especially
good
that
actor.
monologue when he kind of loses it and he just stops giving a fuck. I think he's great in it. So he would be my pick if we were choosing who's your favorite terrorist.
I am looking this film up now, and I cannot believe that it exists. Like, that is kind of mind-blowing to me that movie exists at all in the world. Like, that's
It was
kind
like
of
a
unbelievable.
HBO movie, but it's kind of fun. And you know who's in it? Is our man Dwayne T. Robinson. Paul Gleason plays, guess what? A jerk cop.
Nah, that
hard to
guy never. No, for sure.
Shall we move on to the action?
Let's talk about the action. So what are our action sequences in the movie?
Well, we've got obviously the opening prologue that you talked about, the midair heist. There's the avalanche, using the bad guy as a human snowboard. Really enjoyed that. Very Living Daylights.
They go like a long way with that guy as a human snowboard. It's kind of wild.
There's that explosion with the bridge, the finale with the falling helicopter. It's interesting how this movie is kind of like a series of excellent set pieces. And the action in this but is on point. Like, versus when we talked about Passenger 57, right? We were like, we kind of like this movie. There's flaws with it, where Snipes is amazing. But the action itself, we were struggling to really think of any memorable set pieces. This has got like 5 or 6. The action's awesome.
Yeah, weirdly, I totally agree. The finale with the falling helicopter, I said earlier in this conversation, I think it's really influential. The midair plane heist that opens this movie, did either of you guys absolutely think about The Dark Knight Rises rewatching this?
Oh, I didn't, but yeah, it's The Dark Knight Rises was obviously of much grander scale, but this is itself quite impressive, and I can easily imagine directors watching this and being like, I think I can do that.
Totally.
Yeah.
And Nolan's of that age where I feel like he watched it and he was like, okay, cool, midair transfer, and also English-ish villain with like a like over his face. Like, I really was like, this feels like a Nolan movie. I mean, it's the clearer and understanding, but I couldn't help think about Nolan with that. And certainly maybe the ending is a little more superficial, the finale with the falling helicopter. But Chris McQuarrie clearly saw this movie and was like, yo, I gotta have like a fight on a helicopter or on a cliff at the end of like, a movie I make. And that obviously is Fallout. I thought about Fallout a
I
lot
think
while
also
watching
movies
some
like
of the
Drop
action.
Zone and Terminal Velocity that we're going to do are probably inspired to an extent. I think this is the best action sequence in the film. I think it's awesome.
The ending.
No, the midair heist.
Oh, yeah.
I just love how it builds. I love how. I also want to just mention the very clever casting of this actor, Vito Rugenis, who is the seemingly untrustworthy agent who they're like, oh, this guy's going to tag along. And and Rex Linn seems really like amiable and down to earth. And you're like, oh, well, Rex Linn is trustworthy, right? This guy seems a bit shady, but it kind of like missteps you. And then, of course,
yeah, is he investigating Rex Linn? Is that
yes.
what's going on? He knows that there's
he thinks something is
money
amiss.
changing hands.
But because of the casting, because he has played untrustworthy characters before, and Rex Linn kind of seems like more of a solid dude in the way that they play it. It throws, at least for me, because I hadn't seen it in a while, it actually did work on me. It kind of threw me off the scent because he generally plays sort of slippery characters. And also shout out to Bruce McGill.
Bruce McGill.
Who's on that flight.
Yeah.
Bruce
Love
McGill.
Bruce McGill.
Speaking of, well, not Heat, but every time I think of Bruce McGill, I think of The Insider and how incredible he is in that movie.
I just rewatched that, and the courtroom scene where he screams in the tobacco executive's face is exquisite.
Yeah,
We've
I mean,
quoted it
that's
before.
my
I've
favorite
done my bad Mississippi accent.
That
Channeling
might be my
scene.
favorite Michael Mann movie, to be honest. I love that movie. I think it is unbelievably good.
I'm not sure if it's my favorite Michael Mann. That's like a really good question. My favorite might be Collateral. I think Collateral is my answer there. But I will say that I think The Insider might be his best looking movie, like kind of low key his best looking movie. It is an exquisitely shot film.
Yeah.
And it's fun in a way because it has all the Michael Mann tropes, but they're a little more subtle. It's like, I don't know. I think it's an interesting movie I think it's an interesting Michael Mann movie for how simultaneously not Michael Mann-y it is, but also how very Michael Mann-y it is.
Well, it's a big flex, that movie, right? Like, he did Heat and it did great. And he was like, now I want to make my sort of like 70s outrage, drama about like big business. Like, it's the movie you make after you make, the crowd pleaser, brilliant film.
You
like
cash
Heat.
in your chips basically to make something that you want to make that is not the most commercial material on face value. I wondered if you guys would consider Collateral. Is that Die Hard in a Taxi?
Yeah, that's a good question.
That might be a future. That sound was awful. That I don't know. No, I'm going to cut that out of the episode.
Just because it's awesome. And let's unpack
I mean, it's a great movie. It
That-
has one of Tom Cruise's best performances.
Jamel, will you come back for Collateral?
Sure, yeah.
Yes, that would be awesome. Oh my God. Also, just really quick on The Insider, Dante Spinotti shot that movie. And of course, because every movie that guy shot just looks absolutely incredible.
The other thought I had just in the type of movie The Insider is, it is, obviously The Insider came up before this, but it's like Inside Man, like Spike's, which is a movie that is like it is both free of a lot of the most obvious Spike isms, but also is a very quintessentially Spike Lee movie. And it's very much a flex. It's Spike Lee doing, you think that I do these sorts of like, social criticisms, race pictures. I'm just going to do a straightforward, very 70s inspired New York thriller. And it's going to blow everything out of the water.
It's like a Sidney Lumet movie, kind of.
It is.
Way.
It's very much like a Dog Day. I would compare it. I mean, my immediate comparison point for it is, this is not a Sidney Lumet movie, but the Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3. I think they're very much sort of like
It's the milieu of New York as well, like a cross section of New York City, right? But in a heightened crime scenario. I would suggest Inside Man is also has Die Hard echoes. Because Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3 was also kind of inspired Die Hard. So it all comes back, baby.
I'm also just picking up on what you guys are saying, and that like Spike still manages to say all the things that Spike likes to say in that movie, which is just like, I remember seeing it in theater and being like, holy crap. Also, like, Denzel just oozing, like, we didn't get enough. I mean, we certainly got enough Denzel as action figure, but like, we certainly didn't get enough Denzel as like, kind of cop or like private detective, like, the kind of early Denzel movies that I wish he had the opportunity to make more of. He's just oozing charisma, cool low-key charisma in that movie. And Willem Dafoe. It's a really, really great movie across the board. One more moment of action I want to point to, which I wonder what you guys thought of. There's a moment in this film where one of the villains shoots like some kind of like a giant explosive round, and the camera follows like in a CGI way up the side of the building till it gets to Stallone and he's sort of dodging it. And I was like, I feel like, and I can't point to a specific example, but I feel like I've seen this in 20 movies since. The kind of decision to like do this one take bit of action, whereas like, you know, increasingly action movies rely on like Extraction is an example of a recent example of this, or you know, some like Mission Impossible, some of these fights where this moment feels less reliant on gunfires, cut to reaction, and actually it follows it up the side of the building. And I feel like that's like a Renny Harlin experimenting with like the technology that was available to really do this like smooth. It looks a little dated now, but in that moment, I was like, wow, this feels very like modern, or in our moment, you would see this now in an action movie.
Kind of reminds me of like, you know, the iconic shot in Die Hard 2 of Bruce Willis coming out the ejector seat. You know, that Renny Harlin would create space for these flourishes, you know, within, and it all goes back to, you know, what Stephen E. D'Souza said about him, which was both, I think, compliment and not a compliment, which was, you know, Renny Harlin is a great shooter. You know, he may not have a lot of dimensionality to his movies. They tend to lack theme. They tend to lack they're not trying to say anything, but when he hits, they are really entertaining, and he can shoot the shit out of action.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think that's the exact right assessment of Renny Harlin, that if nothing else, you're going to get a good-looking movie with good-looking action, which, frankly, these days is like more than you can say of most blockbusters.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think he gave us two, I would say, of the more iconic images of heroes in movies, which is Bruce Willis flying into the air when in the ejector seat in Die Hard 2, which is incredible, and then Stallone diving off the exploding brid. Like, I think that those are like, when I think of Cliffhanger.
I just like I felt that you queued me up for my.
It only took an hour to get to that impression, so I'm very impressed. No, I think he's one of those guys that we will remember as like, you know, I feel like a little bit after this, he makes Cutthroat Island, and like, I mean, he makes Long Kiss Goodnight, which I think is great. I think that's his best. I think is really good. Is that a Shane Black script?
Yes.
Wow. Yeah, and then he makes Cutthroat Island and things, and then he makes the Exorcist film, and things kind of start to, you know, I think his reputation suffers. But now, you know, looking back, it's like, man, this guy really knew what he was going for, and he did it unapologetically well, I would say.
Do you want to discuss the lady? I don't know. I think we can skip the humor because there's not most of it. I'm saving again for. There's not a ton of humor. There's a few funny one-liners, but I'm saving them for the Oscars.
Keep your arms and hands inside the vehicle at all times. What about that line? That's a pretty good line. I thought that was a hoot. No, I'm pretty good. Do you guys have any thoughts? I mean, Janine Turner, it's great. I grew up in a household where Northern Exposure was on TV a little bit, so I have a little bit of like love for her, but I don't have much to add. I don't like in these films, and I admit it's a product of the time a little bit, when a very self-sufficient female character is told at the end of the movie to run away. Like she's clearly shown that she like has mettle and is adept, but it's always like, get out of here, I gotta do this myself. And I don't know.
It's just you and me now, Jack.
Having seen
that has to happen. So
neither
scriptwriters
nor directors seem to know really what to do with these sorts of women characters in their films at this point in time. Like it's either the hero tells them to run away, or you have like a scene where that character fights like the woman henchman of the main guy. They have like a cat fight scene. And that's how you kind of like resolve their thing. Interestingly enough, Demolition Man does have, because Sandra Bullock is like the co-lead in that. And she ends up, her whole like resolution is she kills a guy using violence to solve a problem, a thing that she's not supposed to do. And then Stallone like knocks her unconscious to keep her from sort of like doing, you know, engaged in the much more the climactic violence of the film, which is like an interesting way to do it. So it's not like she has a fight and it's like a guy, like she kills a dude, and then she's taken off the board by Stallone. It's like an interesting variation on it.
Well, there's also, you made me think of the moment, Jamel, earlier in the film where he's fighting Leon in the I always forget which one is which, the cave, and she jumps down and kicks him in the face, and then he knocks her out. And this is like a moment to kind of reflect to me, like, this is a gross movie. Like, this is a violent, it's really entertaining, it's really fun, but like sometimes the violence in this movie, you're like, oof, like, he's beating the shit out of he beats the shit out of Leon's mouth is bleeding and he's like all messed up, and he like, he has this whole speech. Like, I sometimes forget that there's like there's a really grotesque quality.
As I say, it comes from horror, like he does enjoy a bit of sadism, on screen. Shall we move on? Shall we put on our tuxedos and move on, get in our limo and head over to the Die Hard Oscars?
Did you bring a tux? Do you have one at home that you're ready to put on for our Oscar section?
Of course, yes.
Jamel actually has been wearing his the whole time. It's like a real commitment. You guys can't see him, but he showed up in a tuxedo. Yes, Phil, please list the nominees for the Die Hard Oscars, a.k.a. the Action Movie Awards.
All right. So I've got 3 from Zinger Machine, Eric Quaylen.
Wait. What award are we talking about?
Sorry, I beg your pardon. We're talking, our nominees are, I'm all over the place.
It's okay.
Our nominees are for the John McClane Yippee-Ki-Yay Award for Best Line. Our nominees are Don't Bother to Buckle Up. You may not want to survive this. I love that one. And then this, Kill one person, they call you a murderer. Kill a million, they call you a conqueror. Go figure.
Go figure.
And I like the bit where Rex Lynn says to him, like, get off my back, Quaylen. I think it's he who says it to him, and he goes, off? I haven't even got on it yet. 3 zingers from Eric, and then possibly my favorite, season's over, asshole! When Michael Rooker kicks shotguns Craig Fairbrass off a mountain. We have a lot to unpack in that scene.
Jamel, what's your pick?
The you kill one person line, I think, is wonderful.
Yeah,
it's such a villainous line, and I think it's great.
Yeah, I like the pseudo philosophy of the villains that get injected into these movies. Every so often they say something. There's something like that in Passenger 57 with Bruce Payne's character about like that later in the film when they have the confrontation scene between the villain and the hero, which doesn't really exist in this movie in quite the same way. But yeah, that's good. But season's over, asshole is like a quintessential stupid, amazing action movie line.
The Conqueror line also reminds me of Gruber mentioned, when he's surveying Nakatomi Plaza and he says something like, was it Alexander wept because there were no more worlds to conquer, right? So there, again, it feels like it's kind of cribbing a little bit from that, but I agree, it's a great line.
Do you guys feel like in these movies, Gruber sort of kicked off the idea of the well-read, well-heeled villain, right? The kind of like, I read about it in Time magazine, kind of like, I'm the smartest person here, right? And that loses out.
No, absolutely. I think Hans Gruber is the archetype for that villain. I mean, Lithgow is clearly going for a Hans Gruber kind of vibe here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He puts his own spin on it. And he is like, I know I was taking some shots about the accent, but no, he's one of the best things about this movie by far, which brings us to the Hans Gruber Exceptional Thief Award for stealing the film. And our nominees are John Lithgow as Eric Quaylen.
This voice, this awards voice, I just can't get over it. You should be working for BAFTA, my dude.
Caroline Goodall as Crystal, the jet pilot and Quaylen's romantic partner. Ralph Waite.
Sacrifice. I'm sorry. I jumped on you, but I thought about the sacrifice line.
Ralph Waite as Frank. We haven't really talked about him. Big fan of his art. I dug it. I'd buy that.
You bought that monkey painting,
I thought it was
right?
cool.
The banana eating the monkey.
I liked his stuff. And Rex Lynn as Agent Travers. So the 4 nominees.
Ooh.
Jamel, do you have a pick?
I defer to the guest.
I mean, I'm going to go with Lithgow.
Okay. Michael Rooker. I know he wasn't on the list, but Michael Rooker steals this movie for me because he's going 250%. Every time he says Gabe, Sylvester, Gabe, I sort of lose my mind.
It's interesting because the hero does sort of split into 2 in this film. As you said, it's almost like a two-headed beast.
Mm-hmm.
Look, it's Lithgow. I mean, he's just so much fun. He's so much fun.
Yeah.
Accent be
Oh,
damned.
yeah, you guys-
I love Ralph Waite in it. I think he's really, really likable character. And that's another moment of incredible cruelty when, spoiler alert, I just think it's so heartbreaking when he comes up to Crystal and she pulls the gun on him and he's like, "But I'm here to help you." It was like,
Yeah.
oh.
A little bit of that Rennie Harlan sadism
Yeah,
and the way his body
really
basically
enjoys
blows apart.
the sort of punishment. But I also think Rex
Yeah.
Lynn is great, particularly in that monologue. But I would go for Lithgow. But to your point about Rooker, our next award is the Dick Thornburg Award for Dick of the Movie, and our nominees are Michael Rooker as Hal Tucker, Leon as Kynette, who remember the moment we may remember he shoots the extreme sports dude in the back. Just
right, yeah.
just to remind you of some of his dickish moves. And Craig Fairbrass as Delmar, the British thug and casual racist.
I'm gonna go my vote for Delmar.
Yeah, Delmar.
too.
It's 100%. Delmar
The
sucks.
worst. And by the way,
He's awful.
that scene, the other thing that sort of annoys me about that scene, he is actually British Craig Fairbrass, but never in the history of association football, which you call soccer, has anyone done a commentary like he does in that scene where he's like, the striker lines it up. He looks right. He looks left. He's going to kick the ball with his foot. It's like, have you ever
I just
want to
just mention the dripping disdain when you said which you call soccer to the two Americans on the call there, which you call soccer. But yes, that scene is ridiculous, and he eats it in the only way that is appropriate.
Yes, I think we all agree that he wins Dick of the Movie. And our final award is the Best Death, presented by Marco.
No more table! That's all I'm doing today because I'm self-conscious about doing that in front of the guests.
Okay.
I don't know why.
And our nominees are Leon being killed by Chekhov's stalactite, Quaylen killing his own lover, Crystal, to exert leverage over Travers, British thug Delmar being shotgunned to death then thrown off the mountain, and Quaylen's fall from grace.
Stalactite. I have the movie on right now, and I'm just watching it. This is the scene of it. I just watched again. It rules. It's great.
I really, by the way, Jamel, I really admire your method acting approach too. I'm just basically going to live commentary the movie while I talk about it on the podcast. That's the move. That's the move, my man. I love that. Yeah, stalactite, or I do have to give it up to Lithgow falling and like the shot of him looking down and being like, no, like that's primo villain dies kind of stuff. And almost a reversal of what happens to Alan Rickman where he's looking up. But in this scene,
It's
Lithgow's
interesting
looking
how
down.
with Die Hard, the Gruber death, although of course we always remember the iconic shot of him falling, but beyond that, it's quite tasteful, right? You never see, it's from a distance, you see, a body falling and you see Dwayne T. Robinson, make a comment,
Right.
but it doesn't like wallow in it in the way that a lot of other films do, like in this one where you get to see the close up of like, no, and it kind of does it in a more tasteful way.
What's your pick, my friend?
You got to go with the stalactite for sheer invention and a nice callback to the icicle death from Die Hard 2.
I think my plan when I make the social media clips for this is just to pull Jamel yelling stalactite so people can guess what movie we're talking about.
Also, a comment on the stalactite, Gilly. It's another reminder of Rennie Harlan's like roots, because it's actually like quite gruesome. Like you see this stalactite sort of like penetrate the body and the blood comes down. It's like very much, it's a slasher death. It's not like an action film death. It's a slasher death. And that,
He enjoys a bit of gore.
I think,
yeah. All right, so
we all enjoy a bit of gore on this podcast.
should we move on to our final
quiz
section?
time. Yes.
Which is our double Jeopardy quiz / trivia. Now, I have to pivot slightly because which is an occupational hazard, is that sometimes one of my trivia questions gets stepped on by something that comes up in the show. But luckily today I did prepare a backup piece in my ankle holster.
Oh my goodness.
So two of them are going to be a little
It's
similar.
your little Derringer that you keep in the boot.
Yeah, exactly. So
Okay, so are we competing or are we
You can
collaborating? I
decide.
think, Jamel, what do you think? Are we working together or are we competing here? The winner gets a set of steak knives.
A set of steak
A set of
knives.
stalactites.
Let's work together.
Oh, I love this. This is great.
Excellent. Okay,
All
great.
right.
All right. Question.
I will send you the half the stalactites then. Okay.
Okay,
All right,
thank you.
guys. Here we go. And the rules are simple. I'm going to ask the question, but then if you want, there is a clue available, meaning you can phone a friend, aka you can radio Al Powell. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Here
sounds
we go.
good.
Question number 1. Which legendary actor, who at this point in his career had previously played both a Bond villain and a Batman villain, was originally cast as Eric Quaylen before being replaced by Lithgow at the last minute?
A Bond villain and a Batman villain?
Christopher Walken.
Is the correct answer.
Wow.
He plays Max Schreck in Batman Returns.
Oh, that's right.
So-
Damn. Wait, just real quick. Do you know what true love is? I can't do it. I'm trying to do sacrifice. Like I'm trying to do it. It's too
I was
hard.
wondering
can't
if you
do it.
wanted to try a Walken impression, but they're really hard.
Give me a line. Give me one line. Give me one line.
What about the
from movie, that
Conqueror
is.
line?
Oh, that's too long. I can't do it. No, that's too stressful. Never mind. Oh, that's so interesting.
But listen to
Wow,
this.
that'd
You know,
be
I
a very
mentioned
different
earlier
movie.
about Lithgow and the Rickman thing. So I found this quote which explains this from an interview that he did with GQ, where Lithgow said this. He said, "I think I had been cast as the sort of second villain. My role was supposed to be played by Christopher Walken, but he bailed and they sort of moved me up the night before. I remember sitting around with Rennie Harlin trying to decide what nationality Eric Quaylen was. Was he an American Secret Service man? Maybe a South African? Or how about an Englishman? It was literally that. And I said, I don't think I can master South African overnight. I think we should make him something other than American. Let's just go the Alan Rickman route."
And the rest is
Direct quote.
history.
All right. Now, my
All right,
second
good,
one.
Good get. I would not have gotten that. Once Upon a View to a Kill.
My second one was two of the actors who played Treasury agents on the hijacked plane, the aforementioned Vito Reginis and Bruce McGill, both appeared in Which Michael Mann film, which we already talked about. I'm going to ask
Insider,
a different
right?
question, which is my
the
backup.
keep. It was the keep. Yeah. They were both in the keep.
So I'm going for my backup, and then we'll go for the final question. So my second question is, which iconic British musician and sometime actor was Rennie Harlin's first choice to play the role of Quaylen?
Sting.
Good guess.
No.
Incorrect.
Okay. All right.
I see where you're going though.
Johnny Rotten. No, I don't
wanna
know.
phone
who
do
is
you wanna call
Vicious.
Al?
Yeah, call
All
Al.
right. He previously appeared in Tony Scott's film debut, The Hunger.
Oh, David Bowie.
Yep, David Bowie was who Rennie Harlin wanted first. And
That's a real sliding doors moment for David Bowie's career. Wow. I would watch
Kinda
that.
wild.
I would.
That would be amazing.
It didn't occur to me to guess David Bowie because it's just David Bowie seems too classy.
He really kind of does seem
But it's
too
interesting
classy,
if you
but boy,
think
can you
about
imagine?
Bowie and Christopher Walken both have a similar sort of like physicality, and they're both
Sacrifice.
very thin, wiry. Okay, Walken does Bowie. Go.
I just did it. Oh, wow. Walken does Bowie.
Brian Ferry of Roxy Music was also briefly considered for the role, so it gets weirder and weirder.
Huh. I love Brian Ferry,
Me
by
too.
the way. This is a thing few people know about me. I actually fucking love Brian Ferry.
You heard it here first on the
Avalon,
podcast.
Boys and Girls. Love that guy.
Me too. Me too. I'm
Yeah,
all
it's good
about Roxy
stuff.
Music and Brian Ferry. All right, final
You guys should
question.
start a Roxy Music pod. I'll subscribe.
Yacht Rock. I would talk about that for a long time. All right, let's go. Last question is convoluted corner. Corner. Bip, 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 bip,
Corner.
Okay. Final question. As we all know, Rennie Harlin directed Die Hard 2 in 1990. But Harlin would also go on to direct an action thriller for WWE Studios with a premise that was decidedly similar to Die Hard with a Vengeance. What was the name of this 2009 action film?
Is this a John Cena movie? Is it The Patriot? No.
No, it's not that.
Is that my in the ballpark?
It's 12 rounds.
Is correct.
Wow, Jamel, you should have just chosen to compete with me here. I don't know what you're a good man.
That's absolutely right.
To have just pulled
it was
the
12
weight
rounds.
here. You get all the stalactites
Okay, thank
and
you,
stalagmites,
thank
but
you.
you have to put them up because I can't remember which one is which ever.
The premise of 12 Rounds was a detective discovers his girlfriend has been kidnapped by a criminal mastermind and has to complete 12 challenges in order to ensure her safe release. Sound familiar?
It's not a good movie, but it's totally a great, you just need something on while you're doing something else movie.
When you're writing, do you just have movies on in the background?
It depends on what I'm writing. If I'm like really working on a column that like record that I have music on or something. But if I'm like working on something, if I'm like researching something that doesn't require a ton of my attention, basically, if I don't have to like really think, I can throw a movie on in the background. Usually a documentary, actually, just because like I don't feel I have to like look at the screen as much. I can kind of just like listen.
Smoother rhythms, kind of a little bit too. I would imagine.
Yeah.
Like it'd be hard to watch Cliffhanger and like
Right.
be like researching whatever happens to be going on. Wow.
Final thoughts on Cliffhanger, guys?
Thumbs up.
Yeah, thumbs up. This is such a fun movie.
It is a really fun movie. I think we haven't done a ranking of the first 12 or 13 movies we've talked about, but like this is a top, at least of what we've talked about so far, top 3, top 4 Die Hard on a blank kind of movie. Like it just works really, really well.
Ones.
And
yeah,
it really is.
I would hand that over. But the last thing I wanted to say about it was I consider it the Shake Shack of action movies, as in it's like elevated fast food. No nutritional value, no themes, no substance, nothing to say, but really tasty and delicious and satisfying.
You heard it. Do you think we can get Shake Shack to pay for the podcast with that line?
That's what I was
Do you think they
hoping
would
for.
do it?
So
Sponsored SpawnCon for Shake Shack. That'd be great. Or maybe we can get that studio exec that got this movie greenlight. Jamel, thanks so much for joining us on the show. This was so fun.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Will you
Thanks for
come
inviting
back?
me. Yes, of course. If you guys do Collateral, I'm back immediately.
I think it's on the list,
it is.
right?
Yep, absolutely.
It is on the list. Fantastic. Anything you want to plug? Tell us about like what's going on.
You can read my column in the New York Times if that's your thing. And then my podcast is Unclear and Present Danger, which you can find wherever podcasts are found. We also have a Patreon that's just the Unclear and Present Danger Patreon. And the difference between the main feed and the Patreon is the Patreon, we're kind of just doing 20th century, Cold War films, and not in any particular chronological order, just kind of what seems interesting to us. So I think, as maybe mentioned, we're doing some of the films of Costa Gavras, who's this French Greek director of political thrillers, and then we're gonna do kind of after that a double feature of the Battle of Algiers and The Day of the Jackal.
Oh my God.
Fantastic.
Battle of Algiers is just such a master. It's such a masterpiece.
One of the greatest movies ever made.
We studied that on our film course. That was when I did my film degree. That was one of the films on the list.
I think the CIA used it used it as a tool. They had them study it to talk about like counterinsurgencies. I may be making that up, but I've heard that it's for similitude is
the Black Panthers would screen it to study insurgency.
So it goes both ways. I mean, yeah, what a masterpiece. Well, listen, I can't recommend Unclear and Present Danger, both the regular show and the Patreon enough. I'm really not enough people talk about Costa Gavras, and now his son is like a pretty accomplished.
Yeah,
filmmaker.
Athena.
Yeah.
I was very well regarded last year. Yeah.
Yeah. That I don't know. Have you guys seen Athena?
No, I have not yet. I have not yet seen it. I kind of went through this like French language action movie binge recently, so I think I'm gonna actually finally get to it.
It has a 13-minute opening shot that is unlike anything I've ever seen before in a movie. It is unbelievable. Phil, I'd be curious to see what you think of it too.
I just want to say as well, before we wrap up, that I'm also genuinely a really big fan of Unclear and Present Danger. I think it's great. I wouldn't say that unless I really felt it. Like the Die Hard with a Vengeance one, I really enjoyed your analysis of the New York politics of the era. And I think it's such a cool way to kind of keyhole in to the political zeitgeist of the time through action movies. It does something very sort of different to what we do here, but it's adjacent, and it's a fantastic podcast. And we're really, really stoked that you joined us today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Thanks, Jamel. Thank you, Jamel Bowie. That was great to have him on the show. And really, please, if you have not, check out. We've said it again and again, but Unclear and Present. There's a lot of movie podcasts, and a lot of them are really great. And there's a lot of them, but I think that really what distinguishes that is, and I hope this one is, the clarity of purpose. They're not trying to give the definitive account or review of a movie. They're just talking about it in a context. Jamel and his co-host, John Gans, they're talking about it in a context that they really can speak to. Jamel being just this very smart writer for the New York Times, and John Gans is writing a book about the politics of the 1990s right now. And it's similarly to having an expert screenwriter like Phil on the podcast who can really talk about Die Hard, and me who can say stupid things and talk about how good things go boom. so there we go. No, it's
Don't
really
do yourself down, Liam.
Don't come on, be nice. Listen. Phil, I'd like to do something that we've never done on the show before. Will you bear with me?
Certainly.
That's not a great lead up to what I'm about to talk about here. I want to read a review.
Where's this going?
Phil, will you podcast marry me? I wanted to read a quick review that we got, and I just think is really great. And I've been meaning to do this for a while.
Okay.
We've gotten a couple of good reviews on the old Apple Podcasts app, and that seems to be the place to review podcasts. But I'd like to read this from Tony Wagner. 5 stars. Thank you. A must listen for action fans. Phil and Liam know their stuff, and they're great. Excuse me, let me start again. Phil and Liam know their stuff, and they're great at reaching beyond the more obvious influences to something deeper about both the movies they cover and the cultural currents that made them. Can't wait for the ep on Executive Decision.
Wow, it comes up every week, Executive Decision.
Everybody loves Executive Decision.
What a lovely review.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Tony. And I'll read the bad reviews, too. Here's one from Phil Gawthorne. Let's get rid of that Liam guy. No, I'm kidding. But it's
The
really
British
nice.
guy's good, but the
British guy's
dude...
good. Are we sure he's really British, though? That accent.
I think he's faking it, yeah.
He's faking it. When he says, who's your favourite terrorist?
Who's your favourite The striker. Lines up the shot. He looks at it. He gets his right foot. He puts it in front of his left.
That is really, it's like he came out of a Dickens novel and got to the mountain or whatever the case might be. So if you want to hear your review read on the show, please review the podcast. Please rate the podcast. The most important, there's 2 things you can do that are really important. More important than social media, more important than Twitter. You can reach out to us. I'm at Liam G. Billingham on Twitter. The podcast is Die Hard OAB on Twitter. And Phil, on Twitter, you are?
Just at Philip Gawthorne.
The best way to reach out to us, shoot us an email. If you have questions, if you would like to offer your thoughts on a recent episode, if you want us to talk about something, we're really open. The email address is diehardoab@gmail.com. diehardoab@gmail.com. Send us a question. If you have ideas for trivia questions, I won't read them. Send them. Phil can put them on there. Maybe we can post a list of the movies that are upcoming so that if you decide that, hey, I have a great trivia question for this movie, we can send it off. Phil, is that stepping on your toes to get trivia questions
No, I'm
from the
open
fans?
to any and all engagement. Now, if there was something like today's episode, you're like, hey, this is a point I wanted to make about Cliffhanger that you guys maybe didn't touch on, or just an additional point that anybody wanted to make. Really anything. It's a totally open forum. We would just love to continue to have the engagement that we're getting with our listeners and include you guys more on the show.
Right. And just, the other thing is, though, another way to really help us out is to tell friends. If you have 40-ish-year-old dad friends or friends in your life or people that like action movies with a thoughtful, recommend both our podcast and Unclear and Present Danger, Jamel's podcast. Next time on the show, the hilarious, bizarre, strange, and next level meta action film, The Last Action Hero.
It's going to be an interesting one, guys. It really is going to be. Liam and I have different views of this movie, and we're going to unpack all that. There's a lot to unpack with this film.
Arnold Schwarzenegger plays Hamlet. It is the perfect fusion of our interests combined into one potpourri. One sort of I'm very excited to talk about it.
We'll save it.
Yeah, sorry, we'll save it.
Join
us
next time for sure.
See you next time. We'll be back next time with some new FBI guys, I guess. Die Hard on a Blank is a podcast created and hosted by Philip Gawthorne. Liam Billingham co-hosts and produces the show. Mike Mayer and Michael Sugar are the executive producers. Find us on Twitter and Instagram at DieHardOAB. Rate, review, follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Most importantly, tell your movie podcast-loving friends about Die Hard on a Blank. Special thanks to Suki Chu. See you next time on Die Hard on a Blank.